Captain Nate Walker had seen his fair share of space wrecks, but nothing like this. His mission had been simple, a routine rescue. A distress signal had come from a remote planet on the far edge of the galaxy, and now he was flying solo through the empty expanse to find whoever was stranded. The signal had been weak, distorted, but there was one thing Nate could be sure of: someone was out there. Nate's ship coasted through the darkening atmosphere of the planet, its rocky surface stretching beneath him. As he flew closer, he could see the wreckage of the ship that had sent the distress signal. It was a mess, pieces of debris scattered across the harsh landscape, parts of the ship smoldering, some still emitting faint wisps of smoke. It didn't look like anyone had survived. The silence of space was deafening, and his stomach knotted at the thought of what he might find. He wasn't used to losing people. He didn't want to lose anyone. He had to find whoever had sent that signal. His boots thudded heavily as he landed his shuttle just a short distance away from the wreck. He grabbed his pack, slinging it over his shoulder, and made his way to the crash site. The air on the planet was thin, and the wind kicked up the dust, swirling it around his feet as he walked. Every step felt heavier, like the weight of the unknown was pressing down on him. As Nate approached the wreckage, the smell of burning metal and oil hit him. But amidst the destruction, something caught his attention. A faint sound, something soft but there, breathing. He hesitated, listening intently. There was no mistaking it now. Someone was alive. Nate quickened his pace, moving toward the source of the sound, weaving through the twisted remains of the ship. His heart hammered in his chest, the hope of a survivor pushing him forward. "Hello," he called, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Can you hear me?" There was no response at first. He moved further in, his eyes scanning the debris until he finally found the source of the sound. There, half buried beneath a pile of twisted metal, lay a woman. She was covered in dirt and blood, her blue skin slightly tinged with purple in places, her long dark hair matted against her face. Despite the chaos around her, she was breathing, alive, but barely. Nate's heart skipped. Hey, are you all right?" He rushed to her side, kneeling down, trying to clear some of the debris away from her. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady as he tried to rouse her. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing bright, intense yellow eyes that looked up at him with a mix of confusion and recognition. Despite the obvious pain she was in, she managed a faint smile. "You found me," she whispered, her voice barely audible, strained from the effort. "I didn't think anyone would." Nate's chest tightened at the sound of her voice. The sheer relief that she was alive made his heart race. "I'm not leaving without you," he said firmly. He worked quickly, gently shifting the debris around her, trying to get her out of the wreckage. She winced but didn't protest. Her eyes fluttered closed again, and Nate was about to call for help when she finally spoke, her voice stronger this time, though still filled with exhaustion. "You're human," she murmured, as if noticing it for the first time. Did you come for me?" He paused, glancing at her. "Yeah, I did. I came to help. My name's Nate." She shifted, wincing as she tried to sit up. "I'm Zira," she said softly, a quiet laugh escaping her. "You're the first human I've met." Nate couldn't help but grin despite the situation. "Well, I'm glad to make such an impression, but we need to get you out of here. You're hurt." Zira's smile faded as she glanced around at the wreckage. "It doesn't matter. I'm not important. I'm just—" "Stop," Nate interrupted gently, his eyes locking onto hers. "You are important. You're not just some casualty. You're a person. You're someone worth saving." For a moment, Zira didn't say anything, just staring at him with wide eyes. There was something in her gaze that caught him off guard, something vulnerable, something he hadn't expected from someone who had survived a crash like this. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, and she gave a small, grateful smile. "You're different from what I expected," she said, her voice softer now, almost shy. Nate offered her a hand. "I think you'll find that humans are full of surprises." Zira took his hand carefully, her grip surprisingly strong despite her injuries. "You're not like the others. They all just left me here to die. It's not something I'm used to." The words struck him harder than he expected. Nate had been trained to rescue, to save lives, but hearing her say that hit him in a way he couldn't quite explain. "Well, not on my watch," he said, his voice firm, his hand still holding hers. "Not while I'm here." As Zira allowed him to help her to her feet, the weight of her injuries became clear. She leaned heavily on him, but there was something else in her eyes, something more than gratitude. She wasn't just grateful, she was aware of him, of the way he was looking at her. He couldn't help but feel a pull toward her, a strange, magnetic connection. "Are you sure you're okay?" Nate asked as he carefully helped her toward the shuttle. "I can get you back to my ship. We can get you patched up." Zira hesitated, her eyes darting between the wreckage and him. "I've been alone for so long, I didn't think anyone would come. I didn't think you would come." Nate's heart skipped a beat at her words. "I always come for the ones who need help." Zira looked at him, her gaze softening. "You found me," she whispered again, as if to herself. Nate turned to face her fully, feeling something shift between them. "I'll always find you," he said quietly. "No one gets left behind." And for the first time in what seemed like forever, Zira smiled, truly smiled. A smile that reached her eyes, that held warmth and hope. It was the kind of smile that told Nate everything he needed to know. They made their way toward the shuttle, the wreckage behind them, and with every step, Nate knew that this wasn't just about a rescue anymore. This was about something deeper, something he hadn't expected to find on a desolate planet. He had found Zira. And now he wasn't about to lose her. The shuttle doors slammed shut behind them with a heavy thud, and for a moment there was nothing but the deafening silence that filled the small cockpit. Zira slumped into the seat beside Nate, exhausted but relieved to be off the ground. She hadn't realized just how close to death she had been until she was safely inside the shuttle, with the hum of the engines comforting her. Nate had done more than just save her. He had given her hope again. She had been drifting for so long, isolated and forgotten by the rest of the galaxy, that she had stopped believing anyone would come for her. And yet, here he was, a human, someone from an entirely different world, rescuing her from the wreckage of her ship. For a long while, neither of them spoke. Zira's breathing had slowed, and the pain from her injuries had settled into a dull throb. Nate, his hands still gripping the controls, glanced at her from time to time. She noticed but didn't say anything. He was concerned, she could tell, but he hadn't pressed her for answers. That was something she appreciated. The silence between them was comfortable, almost peaceful, but Zira could feel the weight of their unspoken connection. She didn't know why it was happening, but she couldn't deny it. Since Nate had first pulled her out of the wreckage, there was something between them, something real. "You're quiet," Nate said after a while, his voice breaking the silence. "How are you feeling?" Zira looked at him, blinking as though the question had caught her off guard. "I'm fine," she replied softly. "I've been worse." Nate shot her a half-smile, clearly not convinced. "That's not saying much. You're pretty banged up." Zira's lips curled into a faint smile. She hadn't expected humor to break through the tension, but it felt good. "I'm tougher than I look," she said, trying to keep her voice light. Nate raised an eyebrow, his smile widening. "Yeah, I'll keep that in mind." She met his gaze and found herself holding it longer than she meant to. There was something in his eyes, something that told her he wasn't just a rescuer doing his job. There was warmth there, an understanding that went beyond words. Zira couldn't help but feel her heart flutter a little at the thought. "So what's the plan now?" Zira asked, leaning back in her seat and trying to change the subject. "How do you get me out of this mess?" Nate's smile faded slightly as he focused on the controls. "First, we need to get you patched up. We're heading back to my ship. From there, I can contact the authorities, get you the medical attention you need." Zira bit her lip, her mind racing. She didn't know how much of her story she could trust him with. The truth of why she had been out there alone, stranded in the middle of nowhere, was far more complicated than Nate could imagine. He didn't know what she had fled from, what had driven her to hide herself from the galaxy. He didn't know the kind of dangers that followed her. But as she looked at him, there was a strange comfort in his presence. He wasn't judging her. He was just helping, and that in itself was a small miracle. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Nate glanced at her, raising an eyebrow. "For what?" Zira looked out the window, watching the stars streak by as the shuttle cut through space. "For not asking questions, for just helping." Nate's face softened and he gave a small shrug. "It's what I do. I don't need all the answers to do the right thing." Zira swallowed, the words sticking in her throat. There was something in his honesty that made her feel exposed, like he had seen her without her armor for the first time. "I'm not exactly what you might expect," she said, unsure if she was even ready to say it out loud. "I'm not like you." Nate turned fully to face her, his expression serious now. "Who says you have to be? You're here, and that's what matters." Her chest tightened at his words. "I don't belong here, Nate," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I don't belong anywhere." He didn't answer right away, instead turning back to the controls. For a moment, Zira thought he hadn't heard her, but then he spoke, his voice soft yet filled with conviction. "You do belong here, Zira. You've got a place now. I don't know what you've been through, but I'm not going to let you disappear." His words hung in the air, and Zira found herself caught between feeling incredibly vulnerable and strangely comforted. She wasn't used to having someone care about her, especially someone she'd just met. But Nate's words made her believe, just for a moment, that maybe she did have a place in the world again. She wanted to ask him more, to tell him about the weight she carried, but she couldn't bring herself to do it just yet. Instead, she looked at him, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "You really know how to make a girl feel special," she said lightly. Nate chuckled, his gaze flickering toward her, "just speaking the truth." Zira's heart fluttered and she found herself leaning back in her seat, more comfortable than she had been in ages. It was strange. A human, a man she'd never met before, had just saved her life and somehow made her feel seen. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The stars passed by outside, and the hum of the shuttle engines was the only sound that filled the space between them. But Zira couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. She wasn't sure what was coming next, or what the future held for her, but for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid. As Nate guided the shuttle toward his ship, Zira glanced over at him. There was something between them, something unspoken, and it felt like the kind of connection that could change everything. And though she had spent so much of her life running, hiding, and keeping herself distant, in that moment, Zira realized she didn't have to hide anymore. Not with him. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth staying for. The shuttle was silent except for the soft hum of its engines as it glided through the stars, heading toward Nate's ship. Zira sat beside Nate, her head resting against the cold window, watching the stars streak by. It felt surreal to be here with him after everything that had happened. Just hours ago, she had been on the brink of death, trapped in the wreckage of her ship with no hope of escape. Now she was sitting beside him, alive and maybe even something else. Nate glanced at her out of the corner of his eye, his gaze lingering for a moment. He could tell she wasn't fully healed, though her injuries were slowly becoming less of a concern. But he could also see that her mind was 1,000 miles away, lost in thoughts she wasn't ready to share. "Hey," Nate said, breaking the silence gently. "You okay?" Zira shifted, looking over at him. There was something warm in his eyes, something real, something that made her feel seen. She didn't want to burden him with the weight of her past, the secrets she had kept hidden for so long. She wasn't sure she was ready to talk about it. Not yet. "I'm fine," she said, offering him a small smile. But it wasn't enough to convince him. "You don't have to pretend with me," Nate said, his voice soft but steady. "You're safe now, Zira. I'm not going anywhere." The sincerity in his words made her heart tighten. She had spent so many years hiding, guarding herself from the world, from people who had let her down. But Nate was different. He wasn't like the others. He hadn't abandoned her, hadn't judged her. He had just been there when she needed him most. "I've been alone for a long time," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've learned to survive on my own, but being with you, it's different. I don't know what to do with that." Nate smiled gently, his eyes warm with understanding. "You don't have to do anything, just be you." Zira's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment she couldn't look away from him. His words settled into her chest like a weight being lifted. She had never had someone say that to her. Not like that. Not so simply, without expectation, without pressure. "I'm not used to this," she admitted, her voice faltering slightly. "I'm not used to someone caring about me, or asking about how I'm doing." Nate's smile softened, and he turned his full attention toward her, leaning slightly closer. "You deserve someone who cares. You don't have to go through this alone, Zira." Zira swallowed, her heart beating faster. She had never let anyone in, never allowed herself to rely on another person. But with Nate, it was different. There was something about him that made her want to trust him, want to open up in ways she hadn't before. But she was scared. Scared of what it might mean, scared of being vulnerable. "So tell me," Nate said, breaking the silence again, his tone playful but warm. "What's it like being a blue-skinned alien in a human world? Do you get a lot of attention?" Zira laughed softly, the sound surprising even herself. "You'd be surprised. Some people think I'm an alien, some people think I'm just really out there." Nate chuckled, his eyes sparkling with amusement. "Well, you are out there. And now you're stuck with me, so we're both aliens in this weird little adventure." Zira smiled, the tension easing from her shoulders for the first time since the crash. She hadn't realized how much she needed this, needed someone to laugh with, someone to share the moment with. It was simple, but it was enough. "You're right," she said, her smile widening. "I guess I'm stuck with you, Captain Walker." Nate's grin widened and he winked at her. "Yeah, well, you're not getting rid of me anytime soon. We're a team now, whether you like it or not." For the first time in what felt like forever, Zira felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a kind of hope she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. She wasn't sure where this connection between them would lead, but she knew that, for now, it was something worth holding on to. As the shuttle glided through space, Nate kept the conversation light, asking her about her home planet and sharing stories of his own adventures. Zira found herself laughing, her guard slowly coming down, piece by piece. She had been running for so long, but with him, she could finally stop. She didn't have to be the warrior anymore. She didn't have to be the strong, self-sufficient person she had convinced herself she needed to be. She could just be Zira. And Nate made her feel like she was enough. Part 4: The Journey Ahead. Hours passed, the stars outside the shuttle shifting as they traveled deeper into the galaxy. The soft glow of the cockpit lights cast gentle shadows across Zira's face as she leaned back in her seat, her eyes growing heavier with each passing minute. She was tired, physically, emotionally, but for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. She hadn't realized how much she had been carrying until now. The weight of her past, the burden of being alone, the constant fight for survival, it had all built up over the years. But Nate's presence, his unwavering kindness, was slowly but surely easing that weight. She wasn't sure what kind of future they would have, what would come next, but right now, this was enough. Nate glanced at her from time to time, his gaze soft, his lips twitching into a small smile whenever their eyes met. He was trying to give her space, but Zira could tell he was just as invested in the connection they were building as she was. The thought made her heart flutter. There was a bond between them that she couldn't explain, a spark that neither of them could deny. "Hey, Nate," she said suddenly, her voice quiet but strong. "What happens next, after we leave here?" Nate's expression softened, and he looked at her with that warmth that made her feel safe, like she could tell him anything. "We'll figure it out. We'll take it one step at a time." Zira nodded, her chest swelling with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "One step at a time," she repeated, the words feeling comforting. And for the first time in ages, Zira didn't feel alone. With Nate by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. Together, they could navigate whatever came their way, one step at a time. The shuttle hummed steadily through the void of space, its engines purring in the quiet of the night. Zira sat beside Nate, the soft glow of the cockpit lights casting a warm halo around them. The atmosphere had changed between them. Gone were the heavy silences and uncertainty. Instead, there was a sense of quiet comfort, a bond forming where none had existed before. Zira had never imagined she would find something like this. A connection, trust. It was something she had given up on a long time ago, thinking she didn't deserve it. But here she was, sitting beside a human, someone who hadn't hesitated to pull her from the wreckage, someone who had kept his word to get her out of danger. A person who, for reasons she couldn't fully explain, had become more important to her than she cared to admit. Nate's voice broke the silence. "So, tell me about your planet. What's it like being a Vexel?" Zira glanced at him, surprised by the sudden question, but the curiosity in his tone made her smile. It was a refreshing change from the usual pity she had received from others. She had always kept her past, her origins, tightly guarded, part of the walls she built to protect herself. But somehow, with Nate, she didn't feel the need to hide. "It's beautiful," Zira said softly, her gaze drifting to the stars outside the window. "At least it used to be. Vexel was a planet of oceans and lush forests, a place of peace, but it's different now. It's all politics and war, always fighting for power." She paused, her eyes darkening for a moment. "I left because I couldn't take it anymore." Nate listened intently, his eyes never leaving the controls but his attention fully on her. He didn't interrupt or try to offer platitudes. He simply let her speak, and Zira appreciated that more than she could put into words. Most people didn't care to hear the truth, but Nate wasn't most people. "Do you miss it?" he asked, his voice gentle. Zira exhaled softly, a small, almost imperceptible sigh escaping her. "I used to, but now, I don't know," she shook her head. "I think I just miss the idea of it, the idea of a place where I belonged. Now it feels like everything been taken from me." Nate's expression softened as he finally turned toward her, his hand hovering over the shuttle's controls but not moving. "I think," he said slowly, choosing his words with care, "that you've just been looking in the wrong places. You've been trying to find something in a place that never really had it to give." Zira met his gaze, the kindness in his eyes almost disarming. She felt her heart tug slightly at the way he saw her, not as a warrior, not as an alien, but as someone who just needed a place to call home. "You're not wrong," she admitted, her voice quieter now, almost introspective. "I've spent so much time fighting, trying to prove that I don't need anyone, that I can survive on my own, but maybe I don't have to do that anymore." Nate smiled, a soft, almost tender expression that made something flutter deep in her chest. "No one's meant to survive alone, Zira. Not really." Zira looked down, feeling her cheeks warm under his gaze. She didn't know what this feeling was or what it meant, but it was undeniable. It was growing, this warmth, this connection between them. She had thought it was just the adrenaline of the rescue, the relief of escaping death's grasp. But now, sitting here with Nate, she realized it wasn't just that. There was something more. Before she could respond, the shuttle shook slightly, the turbulence catching them off guard. Zira's hand shot out instinctively, grabbing Nate's arm for support. Nate grinned at her, the playful glint returning to his eyes. "Whoa, easy there. You planning on crashing the ship too?" he teased, winking at her. Zira raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a smile. "I didn't crash the last one. That wasn't my fault." Nate chuckled, clearly enjoying the light-hearted banter. "Yeah, sure. Tell that to the Wreckage." She rolled her eyes, though she couldn't help the laugh that escaped her lips. It felt good, this easy, playful teasing. It reminded her of simpler times before she had to carry the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders. As they both settled back into their seats, the shuttle finally stabilized. The quiet returned, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a peaceful silence, the kind that came with understanding and unspoken words. "Thanks," Zira said suddenly, her voice low but sincere. "For everything. You saved my life." Nate turned toward her, his expression softening. "You don't need to thank me, Zira. It's what I do. I couldn't leave you out there." Zira smiled, the warmth spreading through her chest again. She had never met anyone like him, so genuine, so willing to help, no questions asked. He wasn't looking for anything from her. He didn't need her to be anyone but herself. For the first time in a long time, Zira felt something she hadn't even realized she had been missing: peace. She hadn't expected to find it with a human, certainly not after everything she had gone through. But here she was, in the company of someone who made her feel like maybe she wasn't so broken after all. "How did you end up being a captain?" Zira asked, shifting the topic, wanting to learn more about him. "That doesn't seem like a typical human job." Nate laughed lightly, leaning back in his seat. "I'm not your typical guy. I just kept pushing, kept doing what I loved, and eventually someone noticed." He turned to look at her, his smile lopsided but sincere. "It's not about the title. It's about doing something you believe in." Zira studied him for a moment, her thoughts swirling. She had heard many versions of that story before, but it felt different coming from him. He wasn't doing it for glory. He wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. It was just who he was, someone who did the right thing because he could. For a long moment the air between them felt charged, like something was building. Neither of them spoke, yet the silence felt full, not empty. Zira realized with a sudden clarity that she didn't want this moment to end. She didn't want the feeling of being here, of being with him, to vanish when the shuttle landed. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Zira allowed herself to believe in something she hadn't allowed herself to believe in: the possibility of a future. A future with someone like Nate. Someone who might just be her home. Nate looked over at her, and for a brief second their gazes locked, steady, warm, and full of unspoken understanding. "Whatever comes next," he said softly, breaking the silence, "I think we're ready for it." Zira smiled, the words resonating in her heart. "Yeah," she whispered, "I think we are." The shuttle cruised through the empty stretches of space, the stars outside a constant reminder that they were far from anything familiar. Inside, the mood had shifted. Gone was the tension of a stranger in danger. Now, there was a quiet bond between Zira and Nate that neither of them had anticipated. They had started this journey as nothing more than a rescuer and a survivor, but something had changed between them. Zira, still recovering from the crash, sat beside Nate, watching him navigate through the silent vastness. It wasn't just the stars that captivated her, it was him. She'd been alone for so long, used to pushing people away to protect herself. But now, with Nate, she felt something different. A sense of safety. A sense of belonging that she hadn't felt in years. Nate noticed her staring out at the stars, her expression pensive. He couldn't help but smile. She had been so guarded at first, but now there was something more in her eyes. He wasn't sure what it was, but he was starting to understand the depth of the woman sitting beside him. "You know," Nate said, breaking the silence, "you look better when you smile." Zira turned her head, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, and when did you become an expert on my face?" He shrugged, his smile playful but genuine. "I've had a lot of time to study you." She gave him a teasing look. "I don't know if I should be flattered or concerned." Nate chuckled, his eyes still on the controls. "I'm just saying, you've got a nice smile. It'd be a shame not to see it more often." Zira's heart fluttered unexpectedly. She had spent so much of her life hardened by distrust, keeping herself at a distance. But Nate's words, simple, sincere, made her feel something she hadn't expected: warmth. She smiled, a small but real smile this time. "Thank you, Nate," she said softly, "for everything." He glanced at her quickly, his expression softening. "No need to thank me. I told you I'm not leaving you behind." Zira's smile faded just a little, replaced with something more vulnerable. She turned her gaze back to the stars, her voice quieter now. "I've never really had anyone say that to me before, that they wouldn't leave me behind." Nate's heart sank a little at her words. He could hear the pain beneath them, the weight of years spent carrying the burden alone. He reached over, gently touching her arm. "You're not alone anymore, Zira. I mean it." Zira's breath caught at the touch. She hadn't expected the simple contact to mean so much. She could feel the sincerity in him, and it made something inside her stir, a longing for connection that she had buried deep inside for so long. "I'm not used to this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to trust people. I don't know how to let anyone in." Nate nodded, his gaze steady and understanding. "I get it. I think we've both been through a lot, but you don't have to do it alone. You've got me, Zira, and I'm not going anywhere." Zira met his eyes then, her chest tightening as the truth of his words sank in. She had spent so long hiding from people, from relationships, from everything that could potentially hurt her. But Nate was different. He wasn't pushing her, wasn't asking for anything. He was simply offering her a safe place. The ship suddenly shuddered, breaking the moment between them. Nate immediately turned back to the controls, focusing on the adjustments needed for the course. Zira leaned back in her seat, her mind still swirling with everything they had just shared. But despite the turbulence, despite the uncertainty of where their journey was heading, Zira knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, she wasn't facing it alone. Nate kept the shuttle on course, but there was a quiet ease between them now, a quiet understanding that needed no words. They both knew there was still a long way to go, a long road ahead. There were challenges to face, questions to answer, but with each passing minute, Zira felt like maybe, just maybe, she had found something worth fighting for. After a long silence, Nate spoke again, his voice light-hearted but sincere. "You know, if you're not careful, I might start getting used to this. You're not so bad to be around." Zira laughed softly, the sound light and genuine. "I'm still deciding if you're worth the trouble, Captain." Nate grinned, his eyes glinting with mischief. "I like trouble. We could be a good match, you know." Zira shot him a teasing look, her eyes softening. "We'll see about that." The playful banter between them was easy, comforting in a way Zira hadn't expected. It was like they had fallen into a rhythm together, not as strangers or rescuer and survivor, but as two people finding their way through this vast, uncertain galaxy. The shuttle continued its journey through the stars, and Zira found herself glancing over at Nate more often than not. There was something about him, something that made her feel like maybe she could stop running. Maybe it was time to stop being afraid. For the first time in a long time, Zira allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't alone, a future with him. Nate noticed the way she looked at him, and though he didn't know what the future held, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let this moment slip away. He wasn't going to let her slip away. Whatever came next, he was in it with her. For Zira, it was the first time in years she had felt a spark of hope. With Nate by her side, anything felt possible. The stars outside the shuttle seemed brighter now, as if they were guiding them toward something new, toward the future they would build together, step by step. The shuttle had been flying steadily for hours, the stars outside turning into a constant blur as they moved further from the wreckage of Zira's ship and toward the unknown. Zira had been silent for a while now, her gaze fixed on the stars outside the cockpit. Nate, ever observant, noticed the shift in her mood. He knew she was processing something. He could feel the weight of her thoughts, even without her speaking. They had made it through the worst of it. She was safe now, out of danger, but there were still questions hanging between them. Zira hadn't told him everything, and Nate understood why. She had been running from something. But what? He could sense there was more to her story than she had shared, and he wasn't about to push her. Not yet. Still, something was different now. Zira had started to open up to him in ways she hadn't before. Maybe she was beginning to trust him. Or maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to face whatever had been weighing on her all this time. He glanced over at her, his voice gentle. "You've been quiet for a while, want to talk about it?" Zira looked over at him, startled for a moment, as if she hadn't realized how far her thoughts had taken her. She turned her attention back to the window, letting out a deep breath before speaking. "I never thought I'd get out of there," she said, her voice soft, almost as if she was talking to herself. "I didn't think anyone would come for me, after everything. I didn't think I could be saved." Nate's heart tightened at her words. He didn't know what she had been through, but he knew it had to be bad if it had made her feel this way, isolated, abandoned. He could feel the pain in her words, but he didn't push her to explain further. Instead, he reached over and placed a hand on her arm, offering what comfort he could without saying a word. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly, his voice sincere. "I told you I wouldn't leave you behind, and I meant it." Zira turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for the truth in his words. And for the first time she found it. The truth was simple, but it was undeniable. Nate wasn't just trying to save her for the sake of his mission. He cared about her, and maybe, just maybe, she could let herself care too. "You really mean that?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," Nate replied, his voice steady and certain. "I do. I wouldn't be here if I didn't." For a long moment, Zira said nothing. She didn't know what to say. There had always been a wall around her, a wall that she had built herself, a wall that had kept people out. But with Nate, it was different. She felt like she could let it down just a little. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding, a connection that neither of them had expected, but that felt right. Zira didn't know if she was ready to tell him everything. She wasn't sure if she ever would. But in that moment with Nate beside her, she realized something. She didn't have to share everything right now. Not all at once. She could take her time. She could trust him when she was ready. Finally she spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. "I haven't always been me," she said, her eyes distant as she spoke. "I've been running from who I really am for a long time." Nate didn't interrupt her. He didn't need to. He just waited, letting her words come when she was ready to say them. "I'm not just some survivor," Zira continued, her voice growing steadier. "I was part of a family, a powerful family on Vexel. They had everything: wealth, influence. But there were always enemies, people trying to tear us apart. And when the war started, I couldn't stand by anymore. I couldn't just watch while innocent people were dying." Nate listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. She was opening up to him, piece by piece, and it took everything in him not to reach out and pull her into his arms. But he knew this was something she needed to do herself. Zira paused, her breath catching as she gathered her thoughts. "I left. I abandoned my family. I couldn't stay and fight for a cause I didn't believe in anymore, so I ran, and I've been running ever since." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of her past. Zira's shoulders slumped slightly as she finished speaking, and for a moment, Nate could see the exhaustion that clung to her. She had been running for so long, and now, here she was, finally facing the truth. "You don't have to run anymore," Nate said softly, his words gentle but firm. "You don't have to carry that alone." Zira's gaze met his, and she saw nothing but sincerity in his eyes. There was no judgment, no pity. There was just understanding. "I'm not perfect," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I've done things I regret, but I don't want to keep running anymore." Nate reached over, his hand resting lightly on hers. "You don't have to. I'm here, Zira. We'll figure this out together." For the first time in a long while, Zira let herself believe it. She wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be the person she had convinced herself she had to be. She gave a small smile, the corners of her lips tugging upward as she looked at him. "Together, huh?" Nate grinned, his eyes sparkling. "Always." The stars outside the window continued to twinkle, and in that quiet moment, Zira allowed herself to believe in a future. A future where she wasn't just surviving, but living. A future where she wasn't running anymore. A future with Nate. And with that thought, she felt the walls she'd built around her slowly start to crumble, piece by piece. The shuttle had been flying steadily for hours, the stars outside turning into a constant blur as they moved further from the wreckage of Zira's ship and toward the unknown. Zira had been silent for a while now, her gaze fixed on the stars outside the cockpit. Nate, ever observant, noticed the shift in her mood. He knew she was processing something. He could feel the weight of her thoughts, even without her speaking. They had made it through the worst of it. She was safe now, out of danger, but there were still questions hanging between them. Zira hadn't told him everything, and Nate understood why. She had been running from something. But what? He could sense there was more to her story than she had shared, and he wasn't about to push her. Not yet. Still, something was different now. Zira had started to open up to him in ways she hadn't before. Maybe she was beginning to trust him. Or maybe, just maybe, she was finally ready to face whatever had been weighing on her all this time. He glanced over at her, his voice gentle. "You've been quiet for a while, want to talk about it?" Zira looked over at him, startled for a moment, as if she hadn't realized how far her thoughts had taken her. She turned her attention back to the window, letting out a deep breath before speaking. "I never thought I'd get out of there," she said, her voice soft, almost as if she was talking to herself. "I didn't think anyone would come for me, after everything. I didn't think I could be saved." Nate's heart tightened at her words. He didn't know what she had been through, but he knew it had to be bad if it had made her feel this way, isolated, abandoned. He could feel the pain in her words, but he didn't push her to explain further. Instead, he reached over and placed a hand on her arm, offering what comfort he could without saying a word. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly, his voice sincere. "I told you I wouldn't leave you behind, and I meant it." Zira turned to look at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for the truth in his words. And for the first time she found it. The truth was simple, but it was undeniable. Nate wasn't just trying to save her for the sake of his mission. He cared about her, and maybe, just maybe, she could let herself care too. "You really mean that?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," Nate replied, his voice steady and certain. "I do. I wouldn't be here if I didn't." For a long moment, Zira said nothing. She didn't know what to say. There had always been a wall around her, a wall that she had built herself, a wall that had kept people out. But with Nate, it was different. She felt like she could let it down just a little. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding, a connection that neither of them had expected, but that felt right. Zira didn't know if she was ready to tell him everything. She wasn't sure if she ever would. But in that moment with Nate beside her, she realized something. She didn't have to share everything right now. Not all at once. She could take her time. She could trust him when she was ready. Finally she spoke again, her voice trembling slightly. "I haven't always been me," she said, her eyes distant as she spoke. "I've been running from who I really am for a long time." Nate didn't interrupt her. He didn't need to. He just waited, letting her words come when she was ready to say them. "I'm not just some survivor," Zira continued, her voice growing steadier. "I was part of a family, a powerful family on Vexel. They had everything: wealth, influence. But there were always enemies, people trying to tear us apart. And when the war started, I couldn't stand by anymore. I couldn't just watch while innocent people were dying." Nate listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. She was opening up to him, piece by piece, and it took everything in him not to reach out and pull her into his arms. But he knew this was something she needed to do herself. Zira paused, her breath catching as she gathered her thoughts. "I left. I abandoned my family. I couldn't stay and fight for a cause I didn't believe in anymore, so I ran, and I've been running ever since." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of her past. Zira's shoulders slumped slightly as she finished speaking, and for a moment, Nate could see the exhaustion that clung to her. She had been running for so long, and now, here she was, finally facing the truth. "You don't have to run anymore," Nate said softly, his words gentle but firm. "You don't have to carry that alone." Zira's gaze met his, and she saw nothing but sincerity in his eyes. There was no judgment, no pity. There was just understanding. "I'm not perfect," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I've done things I regret, but I don't want to keep running anymore." Nate reached over, his hand resting lightly on hers. "You don't have to. I'm here, Zira. We'll figure this out together." For the first time in a long while, Zira let herself believe it. She wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be the person she had convinced herself she had to be. She gave a small smile, the corners of her lips tugging upward as she looked at him. "Together, huh?" Nate grinned, his eyes sparkling. "Always." The stars outside the window continued to twinkle, and in that quiet moment, Zira allowed herself to believe in a future. A future where she wasn't just surviving, but living. A future where she wasn't running anymore. A future with Nate. And with that thought, she felt the walls she'd built around her slowly start to crumble, piece by piece. Part 6: The Truth Revealed. The shuttle hummed steadily through the cold expanse of space, its engines a soft, constant rhythm in the background. Inside, the quiet was soothing, almost peaceful. Zira sat beside Nate, her eyes fixed on the view outside the cockpit. The stars stretched out before her, vast and unyielding, as if mocking the chaos of her past. But in this moment, it didn't feel so overwhelming. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to breathe, to let go of the walls she had built around herself. Nate had been focused on the controls, but every so often he would glance over at her. She had been quieter than usual since they left the wreckage, and he could sense the weight of the thoughts swirling in her mind. Zira wasn't the kind of person to share her pain easily, and Nate wasn't about to force it out of her. He'd wait. She would talk when she was ready. The silence between them felt comfortable, but it also carried a sense of unspoken tension, something important waiting to be said. Finally, Zira broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been running for so long." Nate glanced at her, noticing the shift in her tone. He reached out, his hand brushing against the edge of hers, a simple gesture meant to show he was there, that he was listening. Zira let out a long breath, her eyes distant as she looked out at the stars. "I've spent most of my life running from who I am, from what I've done." Nate didn't say anything at first. He simply waited, giving her space to find her words, knowing this was something she needed to say in her own time. "I was born on Vexel," she began, her voice steady but laced with an undertone of sorrow. "My family was powerful, too powerful maybe, but that didn't protect us from the war, it didn't protect me." She paused, her throat tightening as the memories came rushing back. "I saw things, Nate. Things no one should have to see. I couldn't stay in that life anymore. I couldn't watch people suffer for a cause I didn't believe in." Her voice cracked slightly, and Nate's heart clenched at the rawness of her words. He wanted to reach out, to pull her into his arms, but he knew this was something she needed to say, not something he could fix. Zira's eyes met his then, and for a moment the wall between them felt thinner than it ever had before. "I left. I left my family, Nate. I ran, and I've been running ever since." Nate absorbed her words, the gravity of them settling in his chest. He couldn't imagine the kind of pain she had carried with her all this time, the guilt, the fear, the need to escape. And yet here she was, telling him, trusting him with this part of herself. It made him realize just how far she'd come, how much strength it had taken for her to survive, and how much courage it took for her to share this now. "You don't have to run anymore, Zira," Nate said softly, his voice filled with something close to determination. "Not with me. You're not alone." Zira looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if looking for any hint of judgment, any sign that he was about to walk away. But all she saw in his eyes was kindness, genuine care. I don't know how to stop running, she admitted, her voice quiet, vulnerable. I don't know how to trust anyone again. Nate's thumb gently brushed over her hand, grounding her in the present, grounding her in him. You don't have to do it all at once. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You're safe with me, Zira. You don't have to carry this by yourself anymore. Zira felt a tear slip down her cheek before she even realized it. She quickly wiped it away, her heart racing with emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. She hadn't wanted to feel weak. She hadn't wanted to let anyone in. But Nate was different. And for the first time, she found herself letting go of the fear that had kept her so isolated. I've been alone for so long, she said softly, her voice trembling. I didn't think I could let anyone in. I didn't think I deserved to. Nate shifted closer, his eyes soft with understanding. You deserve all the good things, Zira, and you don't have to do this alone. You're not just surviving anymore, you can live. And you don't have to carry the weight of your past by yourself. I'm here. I'll help you through it. Zira met his gaze, her chest tightening at the sincerity in his eyes. She had never had anyone offer her this kind of unconditional support. It felt strange, but it also felt right. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, she felt like she had a chance. A real chance to live without constantly looking over her shoulder, constantly running from her past. Thank you, she whispered, the words thick with emotion. Thank you for not giving up on me. Nate gave her a small, reassuring smile. I won't. I told you, Zira, I'm not going anywhere. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their conversation settling into the space between them. Zira's mind raced, but there was a sense of peace in her heart that she hadn't felt in a long time. She wasn't running anymore. Not from him. Not from her past. Not from the possibility of a future. Nate leaned back in his seat, his hand still resting gently on hers. So, what's next for us, Zira? Zira looked at him, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. I don't know, she said softly, but I think I'm ready to find out. Nate grinned, his eyes lighting up. Then let's go see what the universe has in store for us. And as the shuttle continued its journey through the stars, Zira realized that, for the first time, she wasn't afraid. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. With Nate by her side, she was ready for whatever came next. Together. The shuttle flew silently through the darkness of space, the hum of the engines the only sound between Zira and Nate. The stars outside the window were a distant canvas of light, reminding her of the vastness of the universe. And yet, in this small, quiet space with Nate, it felt manageable. They had been traveling for hours, but neither of them seemed in any rush to say goodbye to the moment that had shifted between them. Zira sat back in her seat, her gaze drifting back to Nate. She had shared parts of herself with him, things she had never dared speak of before, and yet she hadn't felt judged. She hadn't felt small or weak. There was a sense of freedom in it, in letting go of all the walls she had built around her for so long. Nate was still focused on the controls, but his attention would shift to her occasionally, as if checking to make sure she was okay. It was that attention, that quiet caring that made her feel safe. Not just physically, but emotionally too. Where do you want to go next? Nate's voice was soft, breaking the silence. His eyes met hers briefly, filled with a quiet sincerity that made Zira's heart skip a beat. She tilted her head, her fingers tracing the armrest absent-mindedly. I don't know. I've been running from everything from my past, but maybe it's time to stop. Nate raised an eyebrow. What are you saying? Zira shifted in her seat, the weight of her words sinking in. Maybe I'm ready to start over. Maybe I'm ready to not be the person I've been for so long. I don't want to hide anymore. Nate smiled, a genuine, soft smile that made her heart flutter. I think that's a good idea. You deserve to choose your own path, Zira. No one should decide that for you. Her heart felt light at his words. She had spent so long feeling like she was trapped in the decisions of others. In the past, she couldn't escape. But now, with Nate by her side, there was a chance to change it. To take control of her future, of who she wanted to be. "I've never had a choice in my life," Zira admitted. "Always fighting for survival, always running." She paused, taking a deep breath. "But now, with you, maybe there's a chance for me to stop. Maybe I can finally just live." Nate turned his seat toward her, fully facing her now. "You don't have to keep fighting alone, Zira. You don't have to do it all by yourself. Not anymore." The sincerity in his voice reached deep inside her. His words made something stir in her chest, a mix of fear and hope that she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that maybe, just maybe, she had been given a second chance. A chance to be more than just a survivor. "Maybe we can find somewhere new," she said, her voice low but steady. "Somewhere far from all of this. I don't know yet, but I don't want to be stuck in the past anymore. I want a new beginning." Nate smiled again, a genuine warmth in his expression. "I'm with you, Zira. Wherever that is, I'm right beside you." She looked at him, the weight of his promise sinking in. There was something comforting in the simplicity of his words. No expectations, no conditions. Just the promise of being there no matter what. "You're serious?" Zira asked, a playful edge to her voice, but she could see the sincerity in his eyes. Nate nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm serious. Whatever comes next, we face it together." Zira felt a smile tug at the corners of her lips. "You know," she said softly, "I think I'm starting to believe in that." She leaned back in her seat, her mind turning over the possibilities. The future had always seemed so distant, so unattainable. But now, with Nate at her side, it felt within reach. She wasn't alone anymore. She didn't have to run. She didn't have to keep fighting. The stars outside the window seemed brighter now, their light steady and constant as the shuttle continued its path toward the unknown. There was still so much uncertainty ahead, so much that Zira didn't know. But one thing was certain: she was ready to face it. Not as a warrior, not as someone trying to outrun her past, but as someone who had a future she could finally choose for herself. With Nate beside her, she felt like anything was possible. "Together then," she whispered to herself, her heart swelling with something new. And for the first time in a long time, Zira truly believed it.